I once heard that everyone is an expert in something, even if it is just their own experiences. And there's something to be learned when someone tells their story. Even ordinary people can be hiding something extraordinary. You just have to listen. Who knows how much there is to learn, hiding in plain sight, right in front of you. I've decided to embark on a journey to find remarkable things in seemingly unremarkable places. The only thing I can guarantee is that whatever it is we find, it will be surprising. This is Subject, and I'm your host, Jared. Let's do this. For the first episode of this podcast, I feel like there is no one more appropriate to speak to than my best friend, Ramona. And we will be talking about one of the most interesting people we've ever known, Paul, Ramona's father. Now, Ramona and I met before we both came to terms with our queer identities, me being gay and Ramona being non-binary. And if growing up queer in a small suburb in Southern California, where conformity is king, wasn't enough, our home lives were also less than harmonious. I'm amazed looking back on things that Ramona and I did not end up as step-siblings. Paul embodied that James Dean bad boy Casanova image. Paul had his demons. That was Paul. But of course, he put his own unique spin on it. And that's really what we're going to dive into in this episode, is all the things that make Paul one of the most interesting people I've ever known, while at the same time being somebody who brought about a lot of chaos into this world. Now, it's pretty much impossible to discuss Ramona's relationship with Paul without touching on some potentially uncomfortable topics, so I'd like to provide some trigger warnings for the audience. Now, in this episode, we will be discussing drug use, physical abuse, and clowns, which are arguably the three core pillars of Paul. Also, I think it's important that we start from the very, very beginning, because there's a context. Ramona and I both lived our lives before we met each other, and Ramona had already been through quite a bit. From a very young age, Ramona had to experience packing up and starting all over again, over and over and over. And that is not uncommon for children with parents who struggle with addiction or mental illness, two things that Paul practically juggled his entire life. So I'd like to begin by discussing how that impacted Ramona's life from the very beginning. How did other kids treat you?
When you grow up without any stability, you become very desperate. Always being the new kid, because by the time I got to high school, I'd been to 15 different schools. I didn't learn how to create lasting friendships and lasting relationships. I was never given the chance, because during the summer we would go to our moms, and I can't tell you how many times we came back from our moms to a different house, like not even to a different house, but to a different city, so that at the end of the year, I would just say goodbye to people. So that was one thing. Kids didn't treat me very well because they never got the chance to get used to me. And I never got the chance to learn how to create a friendship that lasts longer than the 6 months that I was going to be at that school. And also I was very naive for all of my book smarts. I just didn't understand when people were trying to take advantage of me. So I was pretty heavily bullied. Actually, when I moved and met you, that was the start of things getting good for me. Okay, first of all, nobody has a good time in middle school. There was a boy who wanted to date me. And of course, I was 11, I wasn't interested in, I was interested, but I wasn't interested in being boyfriend, girlfriend. I just had lots of crushes on people.
Yeah.
And this kid that I was friends with wanted me to be his girlfriend. I was friends with him and his best friend. He was like, you have to choose between me and so-and-so. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And that was during a school dance. That was a Friday night school dance. By the time I got to school on Monday, he had told everybody that we had sex. I had been at that school for about a year and a half, and I lost everybody. I lost all of my friends. That was devastating. School was my outlet. School was the place where I went to get away from being told I was a terrible person. It was deep to my core, dark night of the soul kind of stuff.
Children exposed to domestic violence frequently do not have the foundation of safety and security that is normally provided by the family. These children often experience a desensitization to aggressive behavior. They exhibit poor anger management, poor problem-solving skills, and learn to engage in exploitive relationships. And that last one, the exploitive relationships, is pretty well exemplified by what Ramona just recounted. Even once far into their adulthood, people who have experienced domestic abuse in their childhood struggle to break the chain of abusive relationships in their life, as it is typical human psychology to mimic learned behavior, especially learned behavior that you've picked up from a young age. Thankfully for both of us, Ramona and I met one another and became friends. This effectively broke that chain, or at least began to.
Meeting you was one of the best things that's ever happened to me in my life.
You were my support. Like, I had so few people I could rely on. You were one of the most dependable. I remember you coming over almost every morning, watching me brush my teeth, and just having you walk with me to school every morning. I felt so much more safe and stable. I felt like I never had ground to stand on until I met you. I felt like everything was sinking sand until I knew you. So
I just adored you. And I still do. I've always just been like, I just want to come over to your house and eat all of your snacks and watch you do things. Like, I just want to watch you do things. To this day, I'm still like, can I just like be on a fly on the wall of whatever Jared does? Like, Jared's going to get a colonoscopy. I'm there. Like,
you know what? I feel like, oh, and this is my lawyer. They're going to make you sign a waiver. And that's just how,
Yeah. I'm just here. Look at him. He's just doing it so perfectly. The grace, the beauty. I've always just adored you.
I've always adored you, but you know that. I think you're just magnificent. So I'm obsessed.
We met in middle school, in the homogeneous suburbs of Southern California. The two of us have both independently found refuge in after-school programs. Just one of the many ways we could stay away from home without being hounded. It was in homework club where I saw Ramona across the room, putting down a binder covered with their signature. I had to talk to this person. They were just so cool. It was then I devised a plan, mostly winging it, to say hello.
I want you, because I feel like the way that we tell this story differs on who's telling it. Like, my version of this is very different than yours. How did we meet?
We were in the 8th grade. Sorry. It was the 7th grade. And it was 7th grade homework club by Miss Burrows. Was that?
It was Miss Burrows.
Miss Burrows, our English teacher, because we didn't have any classes together, I don't think. But we did both want to stay out of our homes.
Yes.
So we both were terrible. We're good students. We're smart. We just didn't want to do the homework. So we would go to homework clubs. I just was trying to get social interaction. And you came up to me and you were like, hey, do you want to take a test to find out if you have ADHD? And then I think like one of the questions was, do you write your name over and over? And I like flipped over my binder and showed you that like my first and last name were written like 100 times on the back of my math notebook. Then homework club ended and we were like, oh, I guess it's time to walk home. It was like, nice to meet you. And then it turned out that we lived in the same neighborhood and actually like took the exact same way home.
Yeah.
And those girls were following us.
Wait, which girls?
The girls that were like obsessed with you because they wanted you. Because they wanted you to be their boyfriend. And I like turned around and was like, hey.
Well, I remember there were times when you would just like grab my arm and be like, leave him, like, you know,
leave him
dibs.
Alone. Yeah. I mean, I was hopeful, but you were gay and I knew
you knew it. It's funny because I feel like we both kind of knew, but we didn't quite know what it meant. I remember when I first met you, I was like, Ramona's not like any girl. Lo and behold, you're non-binary.
I was constantly like, why am I not a girl? Yeah, no, I wasn't. I was fucking trans.
That kind of separates you a bit. You know, funny aside, I realized I have this habit and it started with Miss Burrows. Do you remember I started a rumor that Miss Burrows was a stripper?
I do remember
because
that.
I wanted people to believe that at some point in time she had like a knock-in rack and like a hot body. And I was just like, no.
How, like, that was how your way of establishing her worth in middle school was that she used to be hot. Hot that men gave her money. I love that that was like the best you could think of. You were like, she's a Nobel Prize winner. Like, no, you're like, she used to be a stripper.
Well, she actually used to be like a rocket scientist or some shit. Like, she was a brilliant mind.
She was a dancer, I thought. Wasn't she in a movie?
She said she was in My Fair Lady.
That's right.
I totally Nancy Drew the shit out of that. I didn't see her. I didn't see any mention of her at all. And nobody looked like her.
I've been an extra in several movies that have no credit for me.
Possibly. Wait, you have been an extra in a movie?
Something that's pretty much a hallmark of our friendship at this point is one of us will say something to the extent of, hey, remember when this happened? And the other one will go, what? I had no idea. That's insane. Fact of the matter is both of us have lived pretty insane lives. And throughout a large portion of this, I kept learning new insane things about Ramona.
Yeah, my dad used to sign us up for that because they would like give you like $50 and you'd spend like 4 hours on a set. You know how much of a grifter my dad was. Just to show up and get paid to eat and walk around on camera was his dream job.
That's fair.
His friend was a producer of some kind. So we sat through a couple of scenes where we're in the background dressed up and it's a party, but not making any noise.
Every time your dad is mentioned, I learn something new and absurd about him. He's just he was such a character. Person. He's so weird. He
was such a character.
So with that, I want to know, he used to be a clown?
Yeah.
So what is this?
That's how my parents met.
Wait, really?
So my father he was like one of 6 kids, 5 boys, 1 girl, and they were growing up in Watts, LA during the race riots. And my dad probably would have joined a gang if all of his brothers weren't essentially their own gang.
That's a terrifying gang, honestly.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
The Jaramillo boys were their own gang, which is the only reason why my dad didn't join a gang was because he basically was born into a gang. So they were all troublemakers. Like they were all insane. My grandmother was divorced, single Catholic mother in LA in the 60s. A huge no-no to be divorced Mexican and Catholic. To be divorced, period, was crazy. And the kids were running circles around her and getting into all kinds of trouble and being brought home by the police. So my grandmother eventually decided to move down to San Diego. And in that neighborhood, my now great aunt lived, and she ran a clown company out of her house. My maternal grandmother was a clown. All of my mom's cousins and aunts and uncles were clowns. And I know. And my grandmother wrote this beautiful handwritten letter to her neighbor, my now great aunt, begging her to give my dad a chance to be a clown because he was like 14 or 15 and he was a good boy. He was just like a major troublemaker, and she thought that this would help give him like a creative outlet and help turn him around. So he became a fully like certified like Barnum and Bailey clown.
He worked for a circus, like he was a professional clown.
Well, not a circus. It's like a clown troupe. It's like
of course it is. It's like a gang. Yeah. It's a clown gang.
It's like a gang. It's a clown gang.
He went from one gang to another. It's just this one had tiny cars.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's where my mom met him because she was also a clown in my great aunt's troupe. Oh. They were like 13 and 15 years old when they first met.
You being a child of 2 clowns makes a lot of sense, Ramona.
I can't believe you didn't know that.
I didn't know that your mom was also a clown.
My mom was also a clown. Her clown name was Giggles. I don't actually remember what my dad's clown name was, but he was a hobo clown. Like he was a sad clown. And I have to say, every single person I've ever met who was a part of the clown community, they all said that he was the best clown that they'd ever seen. People were really touched by how good of a performer he was.
That's so wild. I mean, he's such a charismatic person. It doesn't surprise me. He's one of those people who just has that energy, that glow.
He really did. He always did. He was always just like very convinced of how cool he was and how interesting he was. And that made him apparently a fantastic clown. He did it full time for around a decade. Wow. He met Dr. Seuss at an event that Dr. Seuss had at his home that he had hired clowns for. They did all kinds of parades throughout California. It was a whole thing. When I was born, he would dress me and my sister up as clowns and take us with him to go do charity work or to visit people in hospitals. So
what kind of clowns were you and your sister?
Well, we were little. So I think we were like kitty cats, clown. And I have a few pictures of my dad putting clown makeup on me because I would do that for Halloween. That's how I got so good at costuming, was my dad taught me how to do my makeup.
That's amazing. So your dad is kind of your drag mother in a way. So
oh, yes. Oh, yes, darling.
Wow. You were born in the midst of his clown career.
No. I was born in the midst of my parents doing whatever it is that they were doing.
So basically they stopped clowning to be crazy.
Bartenders and waitresses and
just whatever to get by.
Yeah. But my dad did do clowning on the side.
Okay. Yeah. Cause he kept doing it.
Professionally and unprofessionally.
You said he never really stopped.
You know, clowning is my mom's family. The clown troupe has long since dissolved, but like they all still do the clowning stuff. My dad did do face paint for our birthday parties and balloon animals. It's really not something you lose. It's kind of like once you're in the military, you're forever a veteran, I guess.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. The skills don't really go away. Exactly. Once you know how, you know how. The red nose really never gets put down. That is just one of the many ways in which your dad is quirky, though. He had many other bizarre things about him.
Well, you know, it wasn't so much that he was bizarre. It's that he was an artist.
That's true.
Like, he was just artistically minded. For better or for worse. He really carried his creativity with him from between when he was breaking the law. That's the reason why he never really stayed in jail, was because he was so creative and charismatic. You know, he could play just about any instrument that
he was very musically talented.
He loved to play the drums, although I hated it. He could play bass, guitar, harmonica. He could play the harmonica and the guitar at the same time. He was often the front man singing, playing the harmonica and the guitar for so many different bands. You know, he was also a very prolific writer. I have stacks and stacks and stacks of his poetry, and I guess you would call it his autobiography. He was so unbearably creative in a lot of ways that looking back, I didn't really recognize as being unique until I was older.
I remember hearing him play the drums going out in the garage, and he was really good. You hated it so much. Why did you hate it so much?
Because my bedroom was on top of the garage.
Well, but you could go anywhere in the house.
Yeah, except for you would not want to be anywhere in the house because it sounded like a freaking rock concert. And he would play when he wanted to play.
Oh, yeah.
Not between the hours of this and this. Like if my dad woke up at 4 a.m. and decided he wanted to rock out, like he was going to do that, you know, or if he wanted to play until 4 a.m, he would do that.
How many times did that happen?
Oh, my entire childhood. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah. No, I was dragged along to so many different gigs. And after we bought the house in Temecula, like our house became like gig central. Thank goodness for that, because now, you know, in my 20s and now in my 30s, like when somebody's like, oh, I'm a musician, I'm just like, ugh. I know what your life is like get away from me. Like,
yeah. When's the last time you showered?
Exactly. How does your mom feel about you living in her house?
That's the pain of being a musician, is it's not lucrative. But I mean, like your dad, I feel like that's something that he struggled with as a creative, was making money.
Yes. No, my dad did not. He had a hard time holding down a regular job for sure.
Yeah.
He always did. That was partly why we moved around so much, was because he was very tragically the trope of the struggling, manic depressive creative. He would just get upset. And he also really hated being told what to do. That makes it really hard to hold down a job where you're being told what to do, because my dad would just be like, fuck you, and cause a huge scene and then quit or get blacklisted.
How often would he come home just fuming because he quit his job?
My entire childhood. Yeah.
Did he have a regular job while he was with your stepmother?
For like a year, he worked at the casino as a bartender, which of course he was an amazing bartender.
Of course.
Because he could talk to anybody. Oh my God. So fun, so charismatic, but also like it didn't help his alcoholism at all. And eventually I think that's probably what led to him losing that job. I spent most of my life thinking that like most people had a stay-at-home dad.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. Yeah. I thought that was very normal. Moms and stepmoms go to work and bring money home.
Yeah.
So that dads can go get guitars at pawn shops.
After the divorce, how in the world did your dad gain custody?
I know that my dad, when my mom and him separated, like he kidnapped me and my sister. And I'm sure that he took all of the money. He hid us from her in different people's homes.
Yeah.
Before social media, like, God, it was so easy to just disappear with people. He kept us away from her almost the entire custody battle.
Wow.
At some point, we started going back to my mom's house. But I remember it being very, very stressful on her. The separation was really hard on her.
Yeah.
And us.
So let's rewind a bit. What was his relationship like with your mom? When did they divorce? How old were you when they divorced?
They were divorced by the time I was 5. And I think they had separated probably when I was about 3 years old. And their relationship was really, really good until they had children. I think they weren't ready to be responsible adults. And I don't think that they really had any idea of what like being a family would require. For instance, like stop sleeping with other people and getting high all the time, which is not to say that, there aren't functional families who do that, but my parents were unable to continue their lifestyle along with raising children. They were really combative. I knew that my life was stressful, and I knew that other kids maybe didn't have to take care of their parents while they were messed up. This is like a very well-documented thing that children who are raised in these kinds of traumatic environments will often develop very strong moral codes and ethics regarding their behavior as a defense mechanism to the fact that their parents don't have them. And I was very much like, I'm never going to drink and I'm never going to do drugs, but I was always interested in them. I found a pot plant that my dad had in the garage and I destroyed it. And this was, of course, before pot was legal. Mostly he was like, "Were one of you in the garage?" And I was like, "Yeah, why?"
So you were the adult when you were a kid.
Yeah, it was very hard. It's definitely where like a lot of my anxiety comes from. Like I distinctly remember getting my sister to brush her teeth before school and getting her food and making her eat breakfast and dressing her on her way to preschool. And I was going to kindergarten. I worked so hard to shelter her from what was going on. I was definitely like the black sheep of the family. And I took a lot of the brunt of the physical and emotional and verbal abuse that my dad could dish out. Looking back, I realized me trying to make sure that I was the target. That was my way to protect her, was to be the loud one or to be the smart ass, keep his attention on me so that my sister didn't have to deal with it.
I mean, did you ever contemplate like running away?
I really did. Lots. I often wanted to, but I was also a very realistic child and understood that living on the streets was not going to be good. And I was safer at home than I was not, I suppose. So like the other option was to go live with my mom, which was not something I was ever interested in.
Say that you went up to your sister and said, "Hey, pack your stuff. We're leaving." Would she do it? Would she follow you?
Yes, that specifically caused a rift with us when I did finally leave at 16, because she went to follow me and I told her to stay behind. And that was because I was worried that he was going to say that I had taken her. I also knew that he did not visit that kind of behavior, and neither did my stepmom. Neither of them were abusive towards my sister directly.
So I want to shift gears a little bit, and we're going into trauma territory, trigger warning.
Oh, we haven't
territory. Well, I think that we've been kind of like orbiting it. You understood that the environment with your dad was better than with your mom, but he was drinking and he was using drugs and he kind of lashed out at you a lot. In what ways would you have considered him abusive when you were young?
It was like growing up in a war zone. I never really knew what was waiting for me on the other side of the door. Coming home was always very, very stressful. Being home was always very, very stressful because he could just be set off by anything. And I've come to understand some of that was the fact that he had a traumatic brain injury. He was riding a motorcycle high without a helmet and crashed and he almost died. He told me about this out-of-body experience that he had during the operation where he died on the table and floated up to the corner of the ceiling and saw them working on him, doing CPR, trying to bring him back. And he knew that he had a choice. He could stay or he could go, and he chose to stay. But that accident did greatly impact his mind. Everybody who knew him before and after will say that he was never the same after that. And so that was really hard because it was very unstable. And
so how old were you when this happened?
This was right after my parents got married. He became a lot more volatile and malicious. You met him. He could be so amazing and charming. And then all of a sudden it was like he was possessed, just terror. That was how I was raised. Yeah,
you come home and it's like, am I going to get a hug or is he going to push me down the stairs? Yeah, you just
exactly.
Don't know.
Yeah. My dad, at some point after my parents separated, he had been drunk on the couch. He ran out of beer and he rolled over to get up and go get another one from the fridge. And I was in a diaper pulling the 40 to him from the fridge.
Oh, you gave him his next beer.
And I was like a toddler. And that was when he was like, oh, I might have to clean up my act just a little. He often told that story as a defining moment. Not that he stopped using. I know that he tried to get clean when he remarried. I'm sorry. I know that he tried to get sober. I know that he did take himself to AA. I remember some AA literature appearing around the house, but he wasn't really doing it for him. He was definitely doing it for my stepmom. And you can't get clean for other people. You can't stop doing drugs for your kids or your job or because you're to make your parents proud. You really have to want it for yourself. He didn't. Either he didn't want it for himself or he didn't believe that it was something that he could do on his own. But either way, he wasn't ready. I know that he was aware that he had a problem. I don't think that he liked to think about it.
A quarter of American children grow up in households where substance abuse is present. These children are much more likely to exhibit poor performance in school, emotional and behavioral problems, low self-esteem, a higher risk of physical, verbal, or sexual abuse, a higher risk of developing anxiety or depression, and there's also a higher risk of early onset of experimentation with drugs or alcohol. And I want to take a moment to say this to anyone who may be in that situation right now. A healthy parent-child relationship is one where the parent takes on the role of a caregiver. They provide physical shelter, emotional support, financial security, all while a young person is still developing. Parents struggling with addiction often infringe upon their children's emotional boundaries, turning the child into an expert caretaker when they should be focusing on their social skills or sense of personal identity. But most importantly, a lot of kids believe that the parent's addiction is somehow their fault. That if they had behaved better, earned better grades, took care of their chores at home, their parents wouldn't be so tired or stressed or wouldn't have to medicate themselves with drugs. This isn't true. I can't stress that enough.
There wasn't much structure in your life when you were young.
No, there was a lot of don't do this or you're going to get screamed at. But also if you do this, you're going to get screamed at. So
there was a lot of lose-lose situations in your
There was a lot of lose-lose. Yeah, I never really could win as a kid. And that I think affected me more than anything. If you grow up feeling like you never get a break, you can become a very desperate person who settles for just about anything that looks like stability.
Anything that even remotely promised hey, this is normalcy. You're like, gimme. But you had no idea.
The same experience over and over and over again. Even if it's terrible, it's okay, that's a guarantee.
It's awful, but it's consistent. Yeah.
It's awful, but it's consistent. It's dog shit, but it's the same dog shit. No corn,
and that feels good. Yeah. In its own way, I can understand that. It feels kind of good.
Sure.
Outside of the home, how did people perceive what your family life was like? Did the rest of your family know how kind of wild your dad was? And did they know kind of the trauma that you were being subjected to?
Well, on one hand, he had a traumatic brain injury, but on the other, I know that he didn't do things in front of other people because he knew that there would be consequences. My family always knew how wild my dad was, but he was also the only one of his brothers who stayed to raise his children. That was something that my dad really tried very, very hard to be different from because his own father had abandoned them. That's how my grandmother ended up getting divorced, was because he just like moved towns and started a new family. The last time my dad saw him, my grandfather asked my dad for some money, and he hadn't seen him in years. I'm for real. Like, he showed up after like not seeing him for a couple of years, and like came and asked for money, and then he went and died like 7 months later, you know?
Oh my God.
So for my dad's family, like, he was staying and raising his children, unlike every single one of his brothers and unlike his father. So my dad was actually elevated in my family, you know, and I do respect him for trying to do differently. He had no context for how it could look like.
And he was really dedicated to being your father. I think about coming over to your house, you know, and I remember how observant your dad was about you and your sister, and how often he thought about the two of you all the time. He cared about you as well as he could.
Yes.
He really
I never doubted that he loved me. I never doubted that he loved me.
Did he say it?
I can't remember.
Paul is somebody who I've known personally, and there's a lot of things that I could say about him, good or bad, but that's not really the point. What I have to admit, what I have to confess, is that I knew he loved his children as much and as well as he possibly could. However, for someone like Paul, love can be complicated.
Were you ever afraid that your dad was actually going to kill you?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. It was my whole life. Yeah. When I turned 18, my sister wished me happy birthday, and I said, thank you. And she's like, I can't believe that you're 18 now. And then she said, I thought dad was going to kill you. And I said, I know, right? Like, I know. Me too.
I thought it too. I'm not going to I was really scared. You didn't talk about it, but we all knew. I knew. Your sister knew. Mm-hmm. I think there were a number of friends who knew that your dad gave you a lashing sometimes. You mentioned that you left when you were 16 years old. What was the moment where you're like, I got to get out of here?
That was the most violent he had ever become.
Okay.
It had gotten to the point where I had to go, or I was going to probably die. Die. Yeah. Really, you know, I could not take it anymore. You know, before, like, you could sort of pretend that it was on the level of discipline. He was really spiraling out of control. And to have a very headstrong 16-year-old who, you know, definitively knows right from wrong while you're spiraling into your addiction, it got to the point where, like, he had packed all of my bags and was screaming at me to leave. And I said, fine.
That was a bluff.
Oh, he would do that all the time. You know,
he never wanted you to leave.
Yeah. He never wanted me to leave, you know, and usually I would start crying, and then, you know, and then it would be like this, and he would send me back upstairs. But this time I was like, fine, you know, and it escalated further to that. And eventually, like, my sister had to come into the garage where he was being extremely combative towards me and open up the garage door so that I could get out, because we both really thought like he was going to kill me. Like, we both really did believe that. It was a really tough time for everybody. You know, I was the person like saying like, this is not okay.
You're the adult.
I was the adult, you know, but at that point, like, even while my dad was being so abusive to me, at one point he was screaming at me, like, who do you think you are? What do you think, you know, this is and I had said, I'm a human being. I deserve to be loved and respected. And this came from deep within. And once I left, I was very vocal about what was happening. So there was a bit of a smear campaign against me outside the home and inside the home. And that really drove me and my sister apart.
Where did you go?
Well, first I tried to go to my bank because I knew that my dad was going to take all of my money.
You're so smart. You're so smart.
He got to the bank 15 minutes before I did. Or rather, he left the bank 15 minutes before I got there, because I called a friend and was like, please, I need you to come get me, and I need you to take me to the bank, because I had been saving up for this day. I wanted to get out. I knew that I would need to. And unfortunately, because I was a minor, my dad was co-signer. He was a co-signer on the account. And so he got there before me and got all the money out. that broke my heart. But luckily I got really lucky. I ended up living with someone who at the time was a very good friend. His parents were well off and they had like, what do you have? Like
a guest house? Yeah, like a pool house.
They had a guest house and they took me in and loved me.
And what was this family like?
It was very validating to me. I was like, oh, I'm not crazy. Other people can live well with each other and they treat their kids well. This is what people do. They don't terrorize each other. It was really good. And then my dad made me move to my mom's.
How did your dad manipulate the situation where you had to leave?
Well, he said that he would file me as a runaway and take them to court for harboring a runaway minor.
Yeah.
If I did move to my mom's, because he wanted to punish me further. And he knew that I didn't want to live with my mom. So he made me move to my mom's because he knew that I was happy. We had never lived together, but for the summers, living with her when I was a child was full of a lot of neglect.
Yeah.
Not intentional neglect. She just didn't realize that you have to make sure your kids brush their teeth and like brush their hair, and they will lie to you about everything if they can get away with it. You have to actually raise children. You can't just have them. And I had a very traumatic experience happen to me the month before I moved to my mom's, a few weeks before I moved to my mom's. And that didn't help my already fragile mental state. And
can I just say something about all this? And I won't let the cat out of the bag, but I remember sitting with you and talking about all of this in Vegas together. And in hindsight, what really strikes me as just so wild is how incredibly mature you were about the entire situation. I really felt like I was talking to someone who was like 45. And when you asked me my opinion, I almost felt like, are you punking me? Because you seemed very certain of what it was that you were going to do and how you were going to handle everything. And I mean, like, I was so impressed with you. You and I have dealt with similar things in that vein. And I spiraled. You were a teenager. You can't handle things well as a teenager. But for a teenager, you handled it really, really well. It's funny because a lot of my friends are always like, I think Ramona could read my mind. And I was like, I fucking know. They're crazy. They're like a superhuman other thing. They're ethereal. You have that sense, but it's because of your maturity and your wisdom and how much you have survived. I'm so proud of you. Yes, I think that some of the trauma that you've experienced has been reflected in toxic relationships, which those relationships, you handled them like an adult. You were a good person in a bad relationship.
You're so sweet. Don't give me too much credit because I am really good at giving off the impression of being a mature individual. But, that's trauma. I'm so good at presenting well that I can even fool myself.
Living with their mom in Las Vegas, Ramona managed to acquire their diploma. Shortly after that, it was back to California.
When I came back to California, because that was always my intention, I felt like if I got my diploma, then my dad would leave me alone.
Did that work? Did your dad leave you alone?
I got my diploma and I started going to college. And he was just like, okay, you're not doing what I would have done, And also subsequently in that year that I left, he realized that he was the problem,
Yeah.
And he started going to therapy and
wait, your dad went to therapy? Like without a gun?
Yeah, right? He got diagnosed. He started taking medication and started going to therapy and cut down like quite a bit on his use.
While you were living in Vegas, you did all this.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it became like very, very clear that like once I left, there was still a lot of problems, shockingly.
What's wild is this continues the cycle. You were mentioning that you would go and you would stay with your mother for the summer. You would come back to a completely new life with your dad, new town, a new house. And you come back and your dad's like a whole new person. I mean, I'm sure that he's still Paul, but I mean, like, There's a dramatic change that happened in his life.
What made our relationship easier at that point was that I was no longer a child in his eyes. Once that burden was lifted from him, I was no longer somebody he had to parent. He was able to engage with me on a completely different level. And we did become very, very close once I moved back.
You came back kind of a different person too. You were ready to go to college. You went to Vegas. You were able to finish high school. Did he finish high school?
No, my dad finished high school.
Oh, he did?
Went to college. Yeah.
Oh.
He actually went to cop college.
You fucking kidding me? Wait, he went to school to be a police officer?
He really did. Yes, he really did.
And my mother gets crazier and crazier. I'm sorry. Wait, what in his right mind made him think he'd be a good police officer? He loved breaking the law. Like that was like his favorite thing.
I know he did really love to break the law. My mom has always said that she's not sure if he went to become a police officer or to become a better criminal.
That's very fair. I don't know either. Now that I think about it that way, it could have been, it's 50-50 really. With him.
It's 50-50. Who knows?
And you're now starting college. Your dad sees this and he's like, oh, Ramona's not becoming me. Ramona's becoming an adult. Ramona's becoming Ramona. And I can finally give them credit for all the maturity that they've displayed.
We were just best friends. You know, I came back and like the first thing he said to me was, well, you got fat.
Your dad.
He was like, oh, well, you gained weight. You know, that was my dad. He was just going to say whatever. Yeah, I did. You know, like I had a very hard year and I put on like 15 pounds, like eat me. But he took me to go register for school. I started the conversation with him. I was just like, so about last year. And he was like, what happened. Let's move forward. I feel like I deserved a little bit more than that. But at the same time, I felt like this is probably like the best it's going to get. You get what you get.
I want to know this, though. You guys became best friends.
Yeah, we talked all the time.
All the time. What was it like going from someone who was kind of terrified of him to someone who just like chilled with him?
At one point, like we would go out for dinner, we'd go out to movies, we would hang out. When I was a kid, I used to be like, I'm good. When we were out to dinner one time, like after I had moved back and, we had reconnected, he was just like, you weren't a bad kid. And I was like, I know. We just chilled like all the time. I was the last person to talk to him the night that he died. We hung out all the time. Once the burden of keeping me alive to adulthood was lifted, he was able to actually relax with me. And looking back, I realized how much anxiety my father had.
Yeah, I could see that. He was so afraid of having bad kids. He was so afraid that you were going to wind up being some like crack whore, which is so like absurd, of course, for anyone other than him. I want to know, what other changes did you see in your dad when you came back?
Well, I've always said that like the last 2 years of his life were like the happiest I've ever seen him. It was really good. He went back to school. He definitely had some sort of learning disability. He had tried my entire life to complete his college degree, and getting on the medication enabled him to finally be able to actually focus on it and finish it. And he did. He got his AA. He was working on becoming a peer support specialist. Honestly, the last 2 years of his life were really good for him.
It's been said that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Making amends with a parent is never easy, but it's something that Ramona managed to do. And I have a theory. Sometimes forgiveness prepares us for tragedy. Sometimes it's nice to heal things before we're forced to let them go.
So, like, what were the events that led up to your dad's passing?
He still had his demons, regardless of being like the happiest that I'd ever seen him. The home life that I mentioned was still like chaotic and sick. Once I had been removed, once the scapegoat had been removed from the situation, like I think they really had to start looking at each other. And there was always a lot of fighting between the two of them. And I think it got worse when I moved out, especially because my stepmom didn't want him talking to me. They had been in a fight. They had been a long 3-day-long fight. And my dad had been, self-medicating during this. And the last time I talked to him, he was drunk. I Yes, at some point, the fighting got so exacerbated that he left the house. We're still not sure where he was driving to. He was on the 15 and he pulled over to change his tire. This was like 4 in the morning. It's a section of freeway, and in between the lanes is actually like canyon, and on the other side of the lanes is canyons. My dad pulled over to supposedly change a tire. I think he might have been going to get another beer, honestly. Like, I wouldn't put it past him or whatever, but he was out going through the trunk, and this 16-year-old kid was coming back from a like mathlete tournament at 4 in the morning. Had just gotten his license and was driving and fell asleep at the wheel and drifted 4 lanes of traffic and hit my dad head on and killed him. Yep. It was very interesting.
Very random. It's like all these.
It was too random.
It's too random. What do you mean by that?
Well, that's how I came to believe in a higher power. You may remember, like, I was a very staunch atheist. I was like,
yes.
So my dad had told me very early on, I asked him when I was little.
Yeah.
Like, Daddy, is there God? Is there a God? And he was just like, there is no God. And I remember this very clearly. And he was like, and if there is, he's a fucking asshole. And I was like, cool. No God. Everything was just too coincidental for it to be a coincidence for me.
Mm-hmm.
I came to believe in a higher power that day, which was very interesting because like the rest of my family is like, there is no God. And I was like, uh-oh.
There was a switch all of a sudden. Yeah. Like you gained everyone's faith and they lost it all.
Yes. My father, he had almost been killed when he was a teenager by a knife. His arm almost got completely cut off. That was because he stepped in to protect another kid. He was like in detention. This was during his high school years. And there was this hippie kid who had a broken arm, and a bunch of gang members were picking fights with him and were jumping this kid to kick his ass. Oof. And my dad instead got in between the gangbangers and this kid, and they almost killed him because they were going to stab this kid. And instead my dad got in the way and almost got his arm cut off. Like, I guess he was screaming. They had to hold him down because he was trying to get up and like kill these guys.
I could see that.
Like with his arm almost severed, like he still was trying.
I don't see that stopping him. No, I see him being like, whatever. I have one good fist.
Yeah, he had this big pirate scar from like the middle of his armpit to almost his back, wrapping around his shoulder from this event. That's how he was. Like, if he could protect somebody, if he could help somebody, he would do it. I believe that there was something cosmically aligned, because the thing about the kid who hit him and killed him is that he survived.
Mm-hmm.
And if it had been like 10 feet one way or the other, like he would have gone into the canyon and nobody would have found him. If it wasn't for hitting my dad, that kid would have died.
That's the only thing that really kept him on the road.
And I do feel like my dad had wrapped up everything that he had come here to do in this lifetime. He was the happiest I'd ever seen him. We had reconciled. I feel like he was ready to go. Like, I feel like it was a cosmic arrangement. Him dying so that this kid
could live
with a really bright future could live.
Yeah. Do you feel like there was anything left unsaid between you and your father? No?
No. I wish I would called him an asshole more.
I think you do.
I miss him every day. I think to call him every day, I see things and I think like, oh, my dad, I'm going to tell dad about, and then I remember like, he's been gone. There's nothing that will make it better.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was really important for me because I did look through a lot of different windows and doors and avenues for something that would make the pain feel better. And really, like, the grief never goes away.
You still feel the grief today?
I do. I have grown around the grief. The grief is still as big as it was when he died. But I have continued to build my life because I did stop once he died. I really didn't know what to do or where to go. And I just tried to like fill the void. And there's no making the grief go away. And there is no timeline for the grief. Some days, even 13, 14 years later, like I'll make a cup of coffee or hear a song or like look at a sunrise and I just start crying because I miss my dad. And that's okay. You know, feeling the feelings, I think, is important.
It's been said that loss is much like an object that you keep in your home. You don't always hold on to it, but it's there somewhere close, up on a shelf, right up next to all these other memories. The big hurts, they don't go away. You just learn how to cohabitate. But there's still plenty of room for good things, and you have the power to put those things on your shelf and see them every day, making light of your tragedies, healing the things that you thought would forever be broken.
You know, if we're all a part of the universe, this might turn some people off, but if we're all a part of the universe, then that means that when we ask the universe for things, we're just asking ourselves for things. And really, we're seeking the permission from ourselves to give things to ourselves.
Thank you for listening to Subject, and thank you to Ramona for opening up and sharing some of the most painful, difficult times of your life. That can't be easy. And I think it's important to the listeners out there that you understand, Ramona's story isn't a tragedy. It's a success story that's just perched on top of some tragedy. Though it may sound trite, it's important to emphasize that there's hope. If you or someone you care about is in a difficult situation, is experiencing abuse anywhere, at work, at home, at school, there are resources out there. For example, there is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. That's 1-800-799-7233. You can also text START to 88788, and that will connect you with someone at the National Domestic Violence Hotline. It is a 24/7 hotline. They speak English, Spanish, and 200 other languages through interpretive services. Once again, that number is 800-799-7233. I hope that this episode can reach somebody who needed to hear all of this. And if that is you, I want you to know you are loved, you matter, and you will overcome this. Once again, thank you for listening to Subject.